Today, I'll be discussing the viability of limited characters in the meta. This tier list assumes high investment and zero misplays, so if you're not into that, then it might not suit you. It doesn't cater skill issue or people who aren't willing to vertical invest. I'll only be judging limited DPSs here because limited characters need actual commitment, unlike standards or 4 stars. And as for why I'm only judging DPSs, it's because you can never have too many supports. Even Sparkle, who is pretty bad, is a valid addition to people's accounts. Sustains are the opposites. You should never pull them. There's only 2 traditional sustains that are on the level of supports in terms of damage increase in their niche, being Gallagher and Lingsha. But I wouldn't even recommend F2P pull Lingsha since Gallagher can do the same thing, or better on single targets. It is better to go for pseudo-sustains like Rame. As for weightage in this tier list, it is not weighted equally. MOC clears are worth more than PF clears, and AS clears have the lowest value. This is because of a few reasons. For one, MOC is getting power crept extremely fast, far faster than any other mode. MOC 12 is now more than triple the HP of 1.6 MOC 12. That's why MOC DPSs are in higher demand than PF. As for why I don't care about AS, it's because it is extremely volatile. You'll have a hard time judging DPSs there. It is a cancerous mode that promotes horizontal investment. Secondly, there's also no goals to aim for in AS. The benchmark for MOC is 30 out of 30 cycles, while for PF, it is 80k points max, with zero cycling PF being used to prove character superiority. But what about AS? Imaginary cycles in AS are literally imaginary. They don't exist, and not only are zero AVs exclusive to whales, it's also inconsistent as hell. Like the current zero AV requires near perfect roll and insane RNG fishing for first half. Since there's zero consistency in AS, and zero goals to aim for, it's by far the worst mode and have the lowest weightage. I'll still talk about the imaginary cycles and zero AVs, but remember their weightage is pretty low for me. The only tangible goal in AES is 3-starring, hence it's the easiest mode. I'll be diving into the tier list now.
But first, I'll be talking about today's sponsor, LD Shop, a website developed by an established company, LD Player. It is a trusted source for all your gacha top-ups. By topping up on LD Shop, you can get up to 13% off compared to the in-game prices. And since they have no handling fees or service tax, what you see is what you pay. I'll be buying this Express Pass, which only costs $4.58, compared to the in-game price of $5. All you need is region and UID, and any top-up will be sent to your account in less than a minute. Don't forget to register using my link in the description to claim an extra 5% off coupon, making it a total of 18% off with no handling fees. It's a good way to support my channel if you do top up after registering with my link.
The metric mainly used here will be zero cycles and cost. If you haven't watched my cost system video, you should go do that first. The best DPS in the game is, unsurprisingly, Fei Xiao. She can 1-cost zero cycle pretty much everything except Hule and Choir. She even has a 2-cost lead over the next best option, as in if X DPS can zero cycle in 5 costs, Fei Xiao would be able to do the same thing in 3, which is a 50% differential. She's unviable in PF, but PF is less weighted, so that's not too much of a demerit. Her performance in AS is pretty broken right now, being able to zero AV with F2P investment on 1 boss, but on Sunday it's looking bleak. She would need to be hard carried to be any use there. That's proof of AS being inconsistent, but if there's anything close to a generalist DPS in AS, It's Facial because she can function almost everywhere. After Facial, there's Zila. She can one-cost Adventuring off elements like Facial, which is an evergreen feat. By proxy, she can also do that on every boss except for Hule and Choir. And I'm pretty sure I actually did it, except for the ones I'm too lazy to record. Choir is an extremely biased boss that is almost as biased as AS, so that's not really valid in judging DPS. But when Hule released, the gap between Zila and Facial is apparent, with Facial being able to 2-cost 0 cycle it, while Zila would probably need 4, with the Spronia strats using Sparkle, E1 Robin, and Bronya. MOC-wise, she's the second strongest. And if PF was worth more, I'd rank her higher than or equal to Facial. But alas, PF is not a priority at the moment. The other reason PF is not that highly weighted is because the buff skews results very often. Not as bad as AS, but worse than MOC. Still, unlike Facial being unviable there, Zila is tied for being the strongest DPS alongside Argentee, Herta, and Jade. She can 2-cost 0 cycle the current PF with March 7th sub DPS for Break, which is the lowest cost 0 cycle right now. And in terms of solo DPS, she can probably do around 5 to 6 cost, which is also the lowest cost 0 cycle for that category. With follow-up attack buff, Herta and Jade will surpass her. And with any buff massively buffing ult, Argentee will surpass her. But Zila is the best on neutral or DOT PF. In AS, she hasn't done much since Kokolia in terms of F2P achievements, but once again, AS performances are based on weather. Her Kokolia performance is remarkable, going as low as 13 AV. She also has the second lowest cost 0 AV, second to Facial, on Doomsday Beast, which is the only AS boss that isn't biased, since it's killed with raw damage instead of gimmicks. Now the next DPS is Acheron. Her performance is usually 1 cost behind Zila, and she's only decent in PF. Sometimes she can even break even with Zila, and on Hule, I'm pretty sure she can do a 4-cost 0 cycle. But even after Jiaoqiu, she can still only 0 cycle with DOT comp in PF. As for AS, she do exceptionally well on lightning weak bosses and can 0 AV most of these or get a low AV clear with F2P comp, but falls off outside of those. What she excels at is the team building aspect of HSR, assuming one of your team is always Facial or Zila, depending on the game mode. That's because Acheron does not take up much harmony units. She can reach her full potential in a 2 nihility 1 harmony comp, instead of the needing multiple harmonies. We have gotten so many broken harmonies in 2.0, it is unlikely for this trend to keep up. If Acheron's E2 is unviable now, I don't see it being viable anytime soon. It's only good if you really need that ERR, or if you're going for E6 like me. Next up is Boothill. His performance in MOC is pretty much equal to Zila's, even surpassing her when turbulence and weakness favors him a lot, like on Hule. The reason he's below Acheron is once again because of team building. While he's ahead of her in MOC, but being unviable in PF is bad as Facial is also unviable in PF. That means you need to make 2 separate teams again for PF instead of just 1. This minor factor is the tiebreaker between Acheron and Boothill. Now we got Ratio as the final S-tier character. His performance in MOC is remarkable, being able to 3-cost 0 cycle Adventuring with 40% imaginary resist. His performance is pretty much on the level of Acheron in MOC, give or take. But the problem is the fact that he got completely power crept in his own archetype, He cannot be ran without Robin, but whatever he can do, Facial can do better. He literally got kicked out of his own follow-up attack archetype. It is literally just bad luck that he ended up where he is. Who would have thought the next best DPS uses follow-ups? S tier is close, so it's decided with nuances like these. No S tier DPS is really far ahead of each other, except maybe Facial in MLC or Zilla in PF. But generally speaking, you need small factors like team building to be tiebreakers. Now on to the A tier DPSs. First up, we got Yunli. This girl's performance is wildly inconsistent, but she can still dish out damage. She can either do extremely well like 1 cost on Aventurine, or 4 cost on Hule, or extremely poorly like 3 cost on Argentee, depending on how often the damage hit her. She can go 2 costs on Argentee with March, but March herself can go 2 costs without her, so we don't count that. Her ridiculous inconsistency is what makes her not S-tier material. The reason 8000 score on APOC this time needs at least 10k resets is attributed to her dumb bounce RNG. You need all 9 of her bounce to go into the purple dino here to kill it. Cleaning with this comp is the only way to leave enough supports for your second half. But just that one RNG check is already over 1 in 1k in terms of rarity. It's honestly annoying to play her. After Yunli, there's Jingliu. She has fallen off considerably because of how her scaling works, but I'm pretty sure she can do a 5 cost 0 cycle on Hule. Her performance outside of MOC is suspicious to say the least, but her feats in MOC warrants A tier. Imbibitor Lune is pretty much equal to Jingliu. He was Zila's biggest competition at one point, but right now his performance isn't too good. Maybe due to disadvantages MOC stages. I did a 9 cost 0 cycle on Hule with sustain using him. As for sustainless, he should be around Jingliu's level. Maybe a bit higher in cost. They are never too far apart. Same thing in the other modes. And that's all for A tier. Pretty short compared to S, because there's not as much nuance between them. B tier should be the same. Starting off B tier, we got Argentee, King of Pure Fiction. On favorable MOC, he can go as low as 3 cost 0 cycle versus Aventurine, which might not seem all that impressive compared to S tier DPSs, but it is impressive nonetheless. Him having single target focusing abilities make him viable in MOC, although it might take a while to charge his ults. Jade is very similar to Argentee, except she doesn't have single target focusing. What makes her stay in this tier is her exceptional abilities on shared HP boss. She's the only one that can 1 cost 0 cycle acquire without even breaking them. Straight up raw damage kill. This has never happened before. Since shared HP bosses are becoming more common, she has a use case in MOC, which warrants a B tier. As a bonus, these erudition units are vital in 0 AV clears too, including the next one on the list, which is Rappa. Rappa is basically Super Break Jade, really good on some bosses like Choir, but really bad on other bosses like Hule. Except she gets stomped by Jade really badly in PF. There's a silver lining though. I've seen her leaked performance in 2.7, and she'll most likely move up a tier when she gets her dedicated supports, because she'll actually be quite good in single target MOC. Now, the moment you have all been waiting for. Fire Fraud Flopshine. The legendary number 1 most overrated trash ends off B tier. The reason she's this low is because of a few factors. First off, she has no use case at all. Firefly's archetype is Super Break. On Hule, you would much rather use the S tier DPS Boothill. On Choir, Boothill still manages to equalize with her at 2 cost 0 cycle, But besides that, there's also Rappa, who is also a super break DPS, and she can go down to 1 cost. Secondly, she's so fraudulent that the moment a beneficial turbulence disappeared, she needed 4 cost to 0 cycle and 1.2 M HP boss in Argenty, losing to a Yun Li, who wasn't able to get hit. Firefly also loses to Jingliu, who can do a 3 cost 0 cycle too, despite her notoriously weak wave 1 fighting against 2 elites with no ice weakness. The current turbulence is massively boosting her performance against Hule. It's essentially combining a character's leak kits with Gallagher, who has the strongest toughness shred, making it basically a 5-man team. Without turbulence, she would need an insane amounts of cost to 0 cycle. The next 3 DPS are only where they are because of Hoyo not making dedicated supports for them yet. They're the pioneers of double-digit sustainless 0 cycle. First up in C tier, there's Black Swan. Not Kafka because the majority of DOT comp damage is from Black Swan. I judge who the DPS based on whose multiplier is doing the most damage. HMC enables Super Break, but her multiplier is not the one doing damage, while Black Swan is. Anyways, the only viable comp to run Black Swamp in is as Acheron support, alongside Kafka. This is because DOT has only received 2 characters in 2 years. If someone like Nahida was added to HSR and makes dot crits, they'll be really good, but right now it's just sad. Next, we got Blade, also known as Mr. 8 Cycles. He can do decent on bosses with wind weakness and blast distribution, but usually he's extremely shit even when getting a dozen turns in a cycle. We need a HP scaling support like Farina to make him viable. Maybe in 3.0 it'll happen. Lastly, the weakest DPS in the game right now is Jingyuan. The 2 generals are polar opposite of each other, one being the strongest and one being the weakest. His biggest flaw is that he can only use 1 Lightning Lord per cycle, which severely restricts his damage output, and makes him far worse than Acheron and Argenty. But the good news is, that issue is being solved in 2.7, so he'll most likely be bumped up to high A tier at least. That buff happening is what gives me hope for the other 2 forgotten archetype. I envision a future where only Firefly would be in C tier, while Black Swan and Blade gets buffed to at least A tier with Nahida and Farina type characters. That's all there is to my tier list. If you still have questions after watching and reading description, feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one.